Welcome to our midweek series entitled Relentless Love. This series forms part of our Christian growth track, which equips you to walk in victory, run with purpose, and soar in destiny. It's been said that love makes the world go round, and it's true. Life really boils down to our ability to receive love and give it away. We are remembered on earth for how we have loved. Relentless Love will help you encounter God's love as a father. Registration for the remainder of the series is important as we'll proceed from session 3 with a closed group. Kindly register by emailing your details to info@cohcc.net. To get the most out of this series, find a quiet space where you won't be distracted or listen with earphones. Order the Relentless book by sending an email to info@cohcc.net so you can complete each session's self-assessment. Join an online group discussion after each session.
Well, welcome to Relentless Love. It's really a story of how God's love chased me down and brought me home. It's also a story of how Father's love seeks to pursue mankind. How man drifted away from God's love in Adam and Eve. And ever since, there's this God-shaped vacuum on the inside of man. And we tried all sorts of things to get our way back to God, but we cannot do it in our own strength. But God came in Jesus Christ and He chased us down. I always think of these boulders in the ocean that face the waves, and how these waves crashes on these boulders relentlessly. They just wave after wave, just keep coming. And if I think of Father's love, I think of those waves that just keeps on pursuing us. They just come on relentlessly. Father will just come for us. He will just pursue us. This beautiful song that Beryl sung about the reckless love of God chasing us down. The first time we heard it was when we were in California at a church. But my own story was really that of me as a young age being the child of a pastor, but drifting away from God's love. I think I was about 11 or 12 years old. My dad was called to another church in a bigger town and a bigger church, but with bigger problems and a lot of problems at that time. And so my dad, being a really good pastor, just threw himself completely into the ministry and into trying to fix what is wrong with this church. And after a few years, they burned out as well. But in that time, it was almost like my dad was completely absorbed into this ministry, into getting this church to work. And where we had quite a close bond, and we would go fishing and do all sorts of things before, suddenly all of that was gone. And it created a resentment in my heart. I didn't understand, and rebellion started to come up in my heart as I became a teen. And I realized that day that my dad took over that church, and I only realized it many years afterwards, but I realized that day I stopped believing in love. That day I stopped being a son. And I went into rebellion, and I started doing all sorts of things that you do when you believe you're an orphan. Because when you and I believe we are orphans, we start acting out like orphans. And I started self-medicating on alcohol and smoking and dacha and fooling around with girls and trying to fill this love void, this love deficit in my heart. But you know, the more you do that, the more you self-medicate, the more empty it leaves you. And then there was 2 youth leaders at our church that made this pact, almost, this covenant before God. And they said, we are not going to stop pursuing Jan and my brother John, because both of us were quite rebellious. We were so rebellious, I want to tell you, that the youth leaders did not want us in their small groups when we attended a youth meeting at church, because we would despise them and disrupt the group and hijack their groups, because we knew the Bible and we were very spiteful. And so they would cast lots. They would cast lots before the youth meeting starts. And the one with the shortest lot had to take me and my brother in their group. That's how bad we were. But then there was these two youth leaders that said they made this covenant with God that they're going to start pursuing us. And then they're going to keep on coming for us until we're back in Father's love, in Father's house. And boy, oh boy, we rejected them. We dishonored them. We despised them. We would humiliate them publicly when they try and reach out to us. But you know what? They just kept coming. Wave after wave, they would just kept coming. We would reject them, they would come back. I'd arrive back from school thinking I'm going to drink my bottle OBS in the cupboard. Then suddenly, who sits in the living room? Cornelius sits in the living room. I don't want you to be here now. But he's here. Friday nights when I want to go out with my friends, as I'm about to leave, suddenly they arrive at the house. No, we're taking you to youth. No, I can't go. No, we're taking you to youth. And they kept on coming for us. Until one day, my heart started melting because of the relentless pursuit of Father's love through these two people. That's my story. That's the story of the Bible, actually. That's the story of God's love. In Genesis 1:26-27, it says, God created mankind in His image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female, He created them. The reality is that you and I were created as image bearers. Children most naturally will reflect the image of their parents. I remember when Jabin was a very young boy, he would copy what I do. And you would maybe recall, if you parents, that your kids would do that. We say that children don't do what we tell them, they do what we do. Because they're image bearer. We created to reflect the image of another, always. And the Father image that you and I hold, listen, will be the image that we express to other people. The way I treat my children fundamentally will be what I believe God, the way that God treats me. And if I think of God as a judgmental God that's harsh, that's almost militant, I will become militant towards my children. If I believe that my dad was absent, he was never present in my life, he didn't really care what's going on, you know what, eventually, if I'm not healed in that area, if I don't form a new father image, I will eventually treat my children in the same way. And that's why it's so important to restore our father image to a true image of who God is as our Father, so that we can, first of all, be healthy ourselves, but also love others in a healthy way. The sum total of my life is determined by the God image that I hold, or the Father image I hold. My life cannot amount to more than the image I hold of who God is or who a Father is. If I want to break through in any area of my life, I need to upgrade my Father image. A financial breakthrough, your financial breakthrough and my financial breakthrough is directly connected to the Father image you and I hold. A breakthrough in marriage or any relationship is directly related to the God image that we hold. Even a breakthrough in physical health and healing is oftentimes directly related to the God image we hold. I ministered to addicts. Katinka and I ministered to a number of addicts. And the one person was an addict for about 23 years. And we were asked to minister to this person. And when we said to the Lord, how do we minister to this lady? God said, minister and heal her father image. Because her addiction was rooted in rejection. And you know, heroin is an addiction that you don't easily break. Once a heroin addict, you're always a heroin addict, they say. But when God encountered her and He healed her wound of rejection on her father image, she was set free instantaneously of a 23-year addiction on heroin. Why? Because our lives can never amount to more than the father image we hold. And I believe you and I are going to have an upgrade in the image we have of God. And that will give so many breakthroughs in so many areas of our lives. It was C.S. Lewis that wrote, He said, I perceive that the original sin of Adam and Eve caused creation to become bent. Remember that, bent. We're going to get back to that. But most of the problems that you and I faced in relationships, in finances, in so many areas of our lives, deals with the way that our father image has been bent by the world. I'm going to get back to the bent now, but first of all, I want to introduce you to an idea called the love matrix. So if you're here with your husband or your wife, you can give their hand a little bit of a squeeze and say, are you ready for the love matrix? Or you can do it like this, for the love matrix. The Bible gives us 4 words of love, for love. 4 words. There's many more, but 4 predominant words. They are storge, which is a Greek word, agape, which is another Greek word, phileo, and eros. Okay? Eros refers to the erotic part between a husband and a wife, which is a very godly thing, a heavenly thing. I believe the intimacy between a man and his wife is the most, or the closest we can get to heaven on earth, if it works right. Okay? Phileo is a term used for brotherly or sibling affection. Okay? It's the connection between brothers or sisters. Paul writes and he says, I want you to treat younger men like brothers and younger women like a sister, and treat older women like a mother and older men like a father. It's that family love almost. Agape is fatherly love or unconditional love that comes from the Father. And storge love, storge love is referring to nurture love or motherly love. That basic nurturing love that we find among families, not only among people, but also in the animal world. Like a mother hen would love on her chicks, or a mother elephant would love on the calf. That's called storge love. Okay, so why is this important? It's important to understand how we progress and grow. When a baby is born in the first 18 months to 2.5 years, it's critically important psychologically that storge love is established within the heart of a child. Storge love from the mother, that basic nurturing love, establish what we call basic trust. David writes in the Psalms, I think it's Psalm 22, and he says, you taught me to trust on my mother's breast. You see, basic trust is established while a baby is nursing at the mother's breast. That's why it's so important for mums to breastfeed their babies, because that bond is so important. It communicates to this child that you are well liked, that you are well loved, and that you have a safe place, that you can be secure. Scientists have well documented by now that a mother's emotional state and the words she speaks during pregnancy affects the well-being of the child within her womb. And if the mother suffers depression, or the mother is an addict, or the mother suffers abuse in a relationship, all of that pain is communicated to that child in the womb, and the child will have psychological issues growing up unless it is healed. So it's so important. The mother is the primary giver of storge love, and that establishes what we call security, the sense of security in the heart of a child. I have a safe place, because everybody in this world needs a safe place. A place where you can be completely yourself and be loved and accepted for who you are. You don't have to perform. You can just be. I just recall when our kids were that age, when they were still nursing, how Katinka could wake up in the middle of the night at 12 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, and talk with the most loving and nurturing voice that I sometimes felt like I wanted to be a little baby. Because if I wake her up anytime, if she's sleeping, I don't get that voice, you know. But it's supernatural. There was a supernatural grace upon her to love and nurture them any time of the day or night, and to impart storge love so that they know they are loved. Essentially, core trust is established. I am loved. I am welcome. I've got a safe place. I belong. The next stage of love is agape, which comes from the Father, and that establishes not so much security but identity. fatherly love establishes identity. In other words, you have value and you have worth. It's the voice of a father that tells us that we are valuable and that we have worth. And value and a sense of self-worth is not something that can be attained. It is something that is imparted. If I would take a 100 rand note, and what is the buying power of this little piece of paper? Because actually it's just a piece of paper. There's no value in this. I mean, the only value that's imparted into this 100 rand bill is 100 rands worth of buying power. And who imparted this value to this piece of paper? The South African Reserve Bank. So there was an authority that printed a piece of paper and imparted 100 rands worth of buying power. Now, what would happen if this piece of paper is shrinkled up, it's stepped upon, you can spit on it, throw it into the water, throw it into the mud, clean, and take it out? What is the buying power of this? Oh, I'm going to stare it now. What is the value? It's okay, why is it still 100 rand? Because it doesn't matter what happens to this piece of paper. The authority figure, the South African Reserve Bank, imparted 100 rands worth of buying power into this piece of paper. You see, value can only be imparted, it cannot be attained. So God uses fathers to impart agape love, and agape love imparts identity, a sense of value and worth in us. If this does not happen, we will feel that we don't have value and worth. We believe that lie. And then we start believing that we need to now perform to earn that love, to feel better about ourselves. But how many of you know that it doesn't matter how much a piece of paper, a random piece of paper can perform how much they ever want, but it can't become a 100 rand note if the authority hasn't imparted, because value is always imparted. The problem is, you and I grew up with broken parents who used to be children raised by broken parents, and they became broken adults who had children and raised broken children who became adults. And all of us have a measure of brokenness, isn't it? Our parents didn't do that because they were evil, but because they were human and because they themselves were broken. Even good parents oftentimes would fall short. The next stage of love, or word for love, is phileo. And it established something in our hearts called prosperity. God designed it in such a way that the nurturing love of a mom, if we are flooded and saturated with storge love from our moms and agape, unconditional fatherly love from our dads in our formative years. So the mom's job is really from conception to about 18 months, 2.5 years. I remember at 18 months, Jabin's heart turned to me. He didn't want anything to do with his mom. He just wanted his daddy. She was a 0 on the contract at the time. And then luckily Danny was born and she had somebody else to wake up for in the middle of the night and love on. But at a moment in a child's development, he turns his attention to his daddy, and he desperately needs his daddy's voice and presence and love to affirm. And when we're showered by storge love from our mums during infancy and agape love, unconditional love, in other words, nothing you can do can make me love me more. I love you complete. When that happens, we find a sense of identity and worth and value, so that when we venture out into the world of sibling love, phileo, or school, we go to school and we start making friends, because that's phileo love as well. When we venture out to that world, where it can be a cruel world sometimes, something is settled on the inside. And we know we can prosper in the midst of other kids. Does it make sense? When our kids were young, I saw that. They would play with their cousins and their friends when we were on a holiday, and they would just play. They would play from 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, till they drop down from tiredness in the evening, because they just love their cousins. After 2 or 3 days of non-stop playing, I could see their love tank emptying out, and they start getting irritated with one another, and they start feeling all sorts of, because the orphan heart that operates among children starts getting to them. And what I used to do, Katinka and I, we would then take that child apart for an hour, and I would go and spend quality time with that child, affirm them, and just fill their love tank, recenter them, and then we can send them back into this maze of children playing around, and they would be fine. So the nurturing love of a mom and the agape unconditional love of a dad prepares us to prosper when we interact with other people. And this foundation then finally also helps us to prosper and meet someone from the opposite gender and fall in love and have a blessed marriage covenant. The problem is, if things go wrong with mommy or things go wrong with daddy and there's a broken relationship here, the moment we turn to sibling love or friendship love, we tend to either go in performance or we're confused. And it also messes up the way we relate then in marriage to one another, because there's all sorts of misplaced expectations that we have, a wife could have on her husband or a husband could have on his wife. And that creates so much pressure in the marriage and disappointment and eventually disillusionment, because we hold our wives responsible to meet our motherly need for motherly love. Or we hold our husband responsible and sometimes at ransom to meet our need for a father. And he or she didn't sign up for that. And that creates so much problem and turmoil in marriage. Sufficient nurturing and unconditional love during the formative years establishes the image of God. So, storge and agape love, motherly and fatherly love, establishes the image of God in us. I've got value. I've got worth. I've got a safe place. I can feel secure. That's the image of God. This established the likeness of God in my life. Image, likeness. Because when I relate to friends and brothers, I can be like God. I'm in my identity. I have worth. I have value. I have a safe place. I'm secure in myself, so I can interact freely. And when it comes to romantic relationship, I can represent the heart of God in a romantic relationship. But if this foundation, if the image of God is not correctly established or properly or sufficiently established, we're always going to have a problem with the likeness of God as expressed in relationships. Now maybe if I can just use the word Eros here. Eros is a beautiful thing. It's a godly thing, the erotic expression between a husband and his wife in marriage. So the closest you and I can get to heaven on earth. But if Eros is not built on a solid foundation of storge, agape, and phileo, then Eros becomes perverted. Okay? Now, you'll find it very interesting that the Latin sign for Eros love looks like this. It's a bent hook, like a fish hook. In other words, it all comes back to me. The definition for that negative state of Eros love is, I will meet my needs at your expense. And so we come to one another, not for love and relationship and real intimacy, but we come to one another for what we can gain from one another. Or we come to God for what we can gain from Him. We learn to love by a hook. And you and I learn from our parents either to love unselfishly or selfishly. It's interesting that we can use another sign, and that is for the agape love, the unconditional love of God, and we can use a straight arrow like this to illustrate that. Because when God loves us, how many of you know He's never got a hidden agenda or motive? You know, when I operate in Eros, I will do something nice to you, but there's always a string attached. You know, some people will give money to the church, but tomorrow they want to make a demand and say, no, Pastor, you can't have people of color in the church because I've given them money. We've heard that, not here, but in churches. Pastor Andre can tell you many stories of where people have given money with a hidden agenda. Sometimes some business people, they will buy you a lunch, but there would be an agenda behind the lunch. You see, if we learn to love God with a bent hook, we're going to love one another as well like that. And the greatest sickness of our time is bent love. That's why C.S. Lewis said, remember he said, I perceive that the original sin, Adam and Eve's sin, has bent mankind, has bent our expression of love. Straight arrow love, agape love, manifest heaven on earth. How many of you have been loved by a person, by another human being, unconditionally? That's the closest you can get to heaven on earth, when somebody loves you with no conditions just because they love you. But how many of you have been loved with a bent arrow as well? Okay, we live in a world where that's the norm, isn't it? Where it's all about what I can gain from it. But that's not how God loved us. God loved us in Jesus while we were still sinners, with no guarantee that we will ever reciprocate that love. Jesus came and He put His hands like this and He loved us with straight arrow. He said, I will give my life. Agape love is defined as meeting another's need at your expense. You see the opposite. Eros, I meet my need at somebody else's expense. Agape, I meet another's need at my own expense. I will pay the bill. While straight arrow love leaves a taste of heaven, bent love leaves behind a taste of hell. When somebody has tried to manipulate you, how many of you feel you walk there and you've got this ickiness about the conversation or the interaction? It's hell. It's a manifestation, small manifestation of hell on earth. Bent love. From our parents, we either learn to love with a straight arrow or with a bent hook. Dr. Bob Mumford said it like this. He said, all of life is reduced to two arrows. If we love God with a hook, we will love people with a hook. But if we learn to love God with a straight arrow, we can also learn to love others with a straight arrow. And I believe part of this weekend is for you and I to encounter the straight arrow love of God. And encounter it enough to straighten whatever little bent there might still be in your experience and expression of love, so that we can start loving one another in the same way. So I wonder how you're doing. I wonder what's going on in your mind as you hear about love, as you hear about different ways of loving, different definition. Because remember, all of us grew up with broken parents. I have a wonderful dad. He was a pastor, still is, wonderful man of God. But he will admit himself that he made some mistakes, because he grew up with a dad that never ever expressed love. My dad had to teach his dad how to show love. And so we grow up with broken parents who were raised by broken parents who were raised by broken parents. And so what you will find in your book on page 25, you don't have to turn there now, but in the break time later, I'm going to give you opportunity to do some of these assessments, because it will help us to have a look into our own hearts, not to look at how bad our parents was, but to kind of define and see where our love deficit lies, so that we can bring it to the Lord this weekend and receive healing. And so, if you consider that, just remember that. It's not to expose them, but it's to expose the deficit. And we're going to take that deficit to the Lord. God is the God of all fatherhood, the source of all fatherhood. Ephesians 3 verse 14 says, Paul prays and he says, I bow my knees before the Father from whom all fatherhood is derived. And so if you can just picture that God is the source of love, He's the source of fatherhood, and He uses parents, and I'll illustrate it just now, but it uses parents as conduits to conduit the love, His love, into our lives. But many times those conduits are broken. And so what do? Do we keep on feeling resentful against these conduits and hate them for how they hurt us and how they didn't. No, we turn our attention, we forgive these conduits, turn away from them and turn to the source, because He wants to be your Father. As Jack Frost put it, he said, the parents that you had wasn't the parents that God intended for you to have. The parents that you had was not the parents that God intended for you to have. And let me qualify. The parents that you eventually had was broken parents. But when God originally created man in His image and likeness before the fall of man, God intended for you to have perfect parents that would represent His heart to you in all its purity. And so all of us had fallen parents, broken parents. We grew up in a broken world. Some did better than others. But even I, as a pastor, who know all of these things, oftentimes I fall short, and I have to go to my children and stand on my knees, look them in the eye, and apologize and say, Daddy, you misrepresented Father's love, and I want you to forgive me for that. Because we're going to make mistakes. The good news is this, that you and I can change our God image. We can learn a new Father image. We can encounter a different Father image, and that will bring healing and restoration and breakthrough in our life. And then one of the disciples, Philip, he struck a core nerve in John 14, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one can come to the Father. And what Jesus is saying, I am here to give you a new image of God. I am here to introduce to you a new Father image. If you had really known me, you would have known my Father, or who my Father is. From now on, you do know Him and you have seen Him. And then Philip says this, Lord, show us the Father and it will satisfy. Philip goes and he says, Jesus, if you can reveal the Father to us, if you can reveal the image of who God really is, then that will satisfy all our needs. Our core needs for love, for affection, for identity and value and worth will be satisfied. And Jesus did just that. The Bible says in John 1 verse 18, it says, Jesus came to manifest the heart of the Father. In the Afrikaans, it says it's so beautiful. In all Afrikaans, they say, Jesus het gekom om die hart van die Vader te vergestalt. He was the manifestation of Father's heart of love to us. In Hebrews, it said Jesus was the explicit expression of the Father. In the Greek, it literally means this. I mean, these guys had technology back then. The Greek word for that means the high definition image. So HD screens was available long before you had your curved screen. Jesus was he was an HD image of the Father. And when Jesus interacted with people, we see the heart of God. When the Pharisees brought a woman in John 8 to stone her because she was caught in the act of adultery, and Jesus asked them, the one of you that don't have any sin can cast the first stone. And one by one they left her because all of them had sinned, right? And only one remained because only one qualified to judge her. Because only one didn't have any sin. It was Jesus. And the one without sin, the one who qualified to judge her, turned to her and said, Woman, where's your accusers? She said, Lord, they've all left. And then Jesus said to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. You see, he was demonstrating the heart of his Father. Every one of his interactions manifested the heart of God. So I wonder how you're doing today. You've come into this seminar, this series. You had many things on your mind and life happened, and now you're here. And now you're locked into what I believe is a God encounter where Father is going to introduce something else to you. How are you doing? Maybe back to my story. And I want us to go to our groups and discuss this. Has there been a moment in time where, like me, you stopped believing in love? Or where you stopped being a son or a daughter of your earthly father, where you harden your heart and say, I close my heart up to the expectation of love. I lock myself up to the expectation of being loved.
When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. Yes, it did, yes, it did. You have been so, so good to me. When I found no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me.